Hi there. I'm Sam Pope. I'm a competitive 40K player. You may know me from my time on Team USA or my Tyranid explorations, but there's some kind of I like to think of myself as a theorist for 40K, trying to come up with the theory of 40K and what makes things strong or weak or things like that is kind of a really interesting field to throw myself into. So I figured after having a good amount of people reach out and ask me for potential coaching, which I do, but I also thought it might be useful to get a few of the kind of core concept that I've developed for myself over my time playing 40K that's worked well for me into video form, and potentially it'll help y'all at some point as well. This is all just me recording from my home. It's not anything going to be super high production value. This isn't going to be a full-time job for Sam, but maybe it'll be helpful for y'all regardless. The kind of concept of the series that I want to do to kind of take, I want to be able to take players with a mid-level understanding of the rules of the game, like they feel like they have a solid understanding of how to play, and take them and kind of provide tools to their tool belt of how to play well, is my goal. So to start with, as kind of my first topic, I wanted to approach the concept of what makes something good or what makes something strong versus weak, on a kind of the competitive board. And this specifically, this kind of metric that I'm going to provide will work for data sheets and detachments and matchups and army rules and full lists. And I think, when knowing this and having this as a metric will help players and help y'all hopefully narrow down your focus of how to improve both your lists and how on the table you need to mitigate your opponent's strengths and reinforce your own. So now I'm hoping that after I kind of explain all this, you will be able to take away not just, a vacuum of this thing is strong because the rules are strong, which is fair, but why is it that sometimes one rule in one given situation is so much stronger than a rule in another? And you're going to be able to provide that strength into a context that will support why the results that we see at the table. So given that, I think that the introduction that I have is that there are three main metrics that determine the strength of any given rule in 40K, and I call these kind of three metrics the three pillars of competitive play. Um, this is, it rolls right off the tongue, but it really, it's so important, these three metrics for any given army or rule, and where they fall into this is holding up your entire army's performance. There are a couple other things that fall outside of them three main pillars, and I'll maybe discuss them in another video. But the three main pillars of competitive play are deliverability, durability, and damage. These three metrics help, you need these three metrics to perform well in 40K in general, and if you don't have them in your list, then it is going to be a whole lot harder as an uphill battle. And some armies will specialize in one of these and be extra good at one, and be just all right at the other two. When you get down to the datasheet level, you're going to see some things that are, hey, these are specifically good at one of these three. It's not as important that if they can't do the others, because you can mitigate that with your detachment rules and your army rules and stuff. But once you get to a list, you want to have all three of these. I'm going to kind of go into depth on each of them. I'm going to define each of them, and in doing so, I'm going to provide examples. Unfortunately, in doing so, I'm going to kind of date this video to the current meta that we are in. and hopefully the concepts that I kind of described will be useful on an ongoing basis beyond that, even if the examples maybe are dated once a data slate hits. Um, Also keep in mind that these three metrics are determined with efficiency in mind. And efficiency, points efficiency, I guess more clearly, is intrinsically part of these three categories. If you deal a bunch of damage but you are 2,000 points, you don't deal that much damage. The context for which how good something is at these three different categories is determined by how much points you are spending for those bonuses, and that's why efficiency is not part of any of these three definitions, because it's technically part of all three of them, I guess. So, without further ado, the first one to look at and define is deliverability. Deliverability, I define it as how much of the board can you threaten. That's that's my definition of deliverability. Um, People could they could define it in other ways. What's your movement speed? What's where can you get from any given spot? But I think defining it as how much of the board you can threaten um, is a is going to capture a lot more of the edge case pieces that are intrinsically part of deliverability, um, and that's going to kind of be important to kind of capture all of that. So what this entails, and what a high level of deliverability gets someone, is it lets them threaten damage across all the board. It helps them take units and apply them in the perfect spot, whether that be specifically damage or getting an action done. If you have deliverability, a high level deliverability, it's going to be easier to do those secondaries, like getting into your opponent's deployment zone. OC, if you have a high level deliverability combined with OC, you're going to be able to take something to an opponent's objective and make it hard for them to hold it, because you can run from a safe position. Part of this definition that I kind of considered including, because just how much of the board can you threaten, I kind of wanted to add on to that from a safe staging position, and I think for the most part that is true. However, I if a unit survives or you're in the late game, your ability to reposition in the late game while you're scrumming for those small pieces is still very relevant. And sometimes you're not staging. Sometimes you just got hit, but you survived. Your ability to take that and go take that damage again elsewhere, and crack back is still important. So your ability to do it from a safe staging position is, yes, important, but it's also just generally how far can you threaten if you do end up surviving and you get a turn to go. Generally, if you have more deliverability than your opponent, then you're going to have more safe spots to stage your units. A higher level of deliverability helps you hit first, which obviously is very important, because in the trading game, hitting first will end up with you usually winning out at the end, because you get the final trade in any given situation. If I hit you with 2,000, 1,000 points, and you lose 500, you can hit me back with 1,500, and then I hit you with another, whatever's remaining, 1,500 points, and it knocks you down. Like, your ability to respond is less, and that makes a stronger army. There's some more abnormal types of deliverability, like 6-inch pile-in is a type, because it gives your army the ability to swing off of opponent units to tag other things. Scoot and shoot. Shoot and scoot is, sometimes a type of deliverability, because it gives you 6 inches of extra movement, so it delivers OC. It can also be a type of durability, which we'll talk about in a second, because it lets your unit survive. It's a very useful rule and a very dynamic rule. Uppy downy rules, where you pick up and put down. 6-inch charge rules. Long range is a type of deliverability. assault on your guns, advance and charge, advance and shoot, just general movement characteristics. All of that is deliverability at its core, uh, and those are all rules that are extremely relevant to have in your faction. If your faction just moved 6 inches and that was it, you'd have a hard time playing against pretty much any meta faction in the game. Some of the different types of deliverability have more weaknesses than others. If you have advance and shoot but not advance and charge in your army, you are sacrificing something by advancing to shoot. It's a little bit worse. If you are an uppy downy army where you pick up and put down, you can threaten most of the board from a safe spot, but if your opponent screens, your ability to get into the back line is much more limited than, say, someone with just like a high movement speed. They're going to have a lot easier time getting into the back line. But you're going to have a safer time engaging if you have uppy downy rules. There's benefits and weaknesses of each type of deliverability. Some are usually inherently stronger, but that's kind of the core. Some examples of good S tier deliverability. To start with, a unit with S tier deliverability is Warp Spiders and Eldari. They have a 24-inch move on their data sheet. There's not a whole lot in their infantry. They move through walls. There's not a whole lot that can stop them from going where they want to go. That data sheet, outside of separated from the detachment and the army rule, would be just high tier deliverability in any army you were to put it in. If you were to think about a detachment with S tier deliverability, I would think of Demonic Incursion with demons. They have the 6-inch deep strike as their detachment rule from their greater demons, or if they control the objectives, they have a strat that lets them just 6-inch deep strike and still charge. And then they also have an advance and charge strat in the detachment. So their ability to threaten the board just based on the detachment and not the data sheets or the army rule, that detachment has got to be one of the best ones for it. An army rule with S tier deliverability, Emperor's Children comes to mind. Advance and charge, advance and shoot on your entire army is just crazy. It's a lot. Grey Knights is also a good example of just deliverability as an army rule. You are picking up, you are putting down, and that is threatening a lot of the board over the course of the game. A list, like an army composition with S tier deliverability right now in the meta, I'm thinking of Spectacle of Spite from Drukhari. They have an army rule that gives their witches advance and charge, and then the witches' data sheet is 8 inches. The detachment also gives them plus 2 inches move. You can take the data sheet with the boat, the raider, to give them a 6-inch disembark, and then there's so many ways to deliver that damage where if you stack it all on top of each other, any one of those rules by itself, 6-inch disembark or plus 2 inches move, would be good, but because you stack them all together, you have insane deliverability and you can threaten so many parts of the map from a very safe spot. The charge when someone ends a move near you is a type of deliverability. I also think of it more as a type of durability, but it can also come into play. So yeah, the next one is durability. Nope, that's damage. It's durability. There it is. Durability is the way that I define it is how difficult is it to stop you from getting value out of the same unit multiple times. It's not just your ability to survive, because you can survive and still not get value out of a unit. A unit cannot be destroyed and still be out of the game or lose a turn of efficiency, but that is a big part of it even still. Along with the just having good defensive profiles, I would say another type of durability is indirect fire. you're going to get value out of that unit 5 turns in a row. And it is super uninteractable, which makes it a really, really strong type of durability, which is why it's a little bit unhealthy for the game in a lot of cases. Um, the shoot and scoot, like I mentioned, with deliverability, being able to activate a unit if it has a lot of damage and then come back behind cover or hop back in a boat, is a lot of durability. Good example is if, when the fire dragons with Flagon hop back in their boat, that's durability at the end of the day, even if the units themselves don't have a lot of durability. If you can't shoot them and they activated already, or if someone activates into you, I guess that's another example where if you are an army with low deliverability, but someone activates into you first, that's still a type of value. So when I say getting value multiple times out of a unit, baiting your opponent's aggression and having them commit units is a type of value, even if it's not doing damage. So being able to do that, bait that aggression, and then have the unit survive and be able to do that same thing again, is durability. The other big one is, I would say, fall back and act is a type of durability. It's not deliverability because you aren't threatening a wider portion of the board necessarily. You are instead able to activate with a unit another time than you would otherwise have been able to. So while an army like Emperor's Children has deliverability built into their army rule, they also have durability because they have fallback and act. So the other thing that's important to think about with durability is reactive durability, usually in the form of stratagems, but also potentially in the form of once per game datasheet abilities. If you have the ability to make any one of your units more durable than they otherwise would be at any point in the game, it forces your opponent to consider essentially that you have that durability. If they want to kill your unit, they have to just assume that that will happen, despite the fact that you can only put it on one unit, or you can only do it if you have blank resource. Even still, when your opponent is committing that resource to try and kill that resource in their head, they just have to assume you have it. And so that forces them to commit more resources than they otherwise would. So when detachments or armies don't have reactive durability, it makes them a lot worse, because it takes a whole basically army-wide durability buff away from the way that they play the game. So some examples of high durability rules, I guess. First, starting with the unit, I would say Deathwing Knights is kind of a classic example of a high durability unit. It is, 2-up save, 4 wounds, -1 damage, 4-up interval. It has all of those defensive tools stacked right into the datasheet, regardless of detachment or army rule. That datasheet in any army would be durable. Something like Scourge's shooting and scooting or something like that is also a fine example. Detachments with S tier durability, I think of Skitarii Hunter cohort as a good one, giving the whole army stealth, just -1 to hit and shooting, and then providing a 5-up feel no pain strat. So you have both one of the best examples in the game of a strong reactive durability along with cover and stealth built into the detachment rule. That's some really solid, defensive detachment power. An army rule with S tier durability, I think a good example is actually Genestealer cults. A lot of the army's rules have little riders for durability, but not very many of them focus purely on durability. But I would say Genestealer cults does, because by definition you are getting value out of their units multiple times when you respawn a unit and use it again, and that is completely uninteractable in the sense that once they kill your unit, I mean, if they leave your unit alive, it's interactable, but if they can't stop you from getting value out of that unit multiple times, if they want to remove that unit from the battlefield, and so it just gets that value multiple times. A good list right now in the meta with durability. Um, I'm thinking of Virulent Vectorum Death Guard. They have -1 to hit from their army rule, -1 damage in their detachment. They have data sheets that are very durable by definition. They have the Mortarion with T12, 2 up, 4 up, 5 up, and with -1 damage access and -1 to hit access, that unit starts to just have ridiculous durability. Um, but there's other armies, anything that kind of is built around um, keeping things alive. I also think of the awakened Necrons with um, they have both a reactive durability strat to uh, regenerate when you're shot. They also have a stand back up with their characters. Both are ways to get value multiple times out of your units, and then with the regen built in, and then with the Feel No Pain data sheets, those are all that's some great durability right there. Um, and the last pillar of competitive play is damage. Um, Damage is the way that I define it. It's kind of the hardest to define, honestly, for me, but the way that I've defined it is how consistent are your resources per activation at removing opposing resources from play. I think the per activation part is important because durability is the stacking modifier of multiple times. So an army that over the course of the game hurts you a lot with indirect, I would not say necessarily has high damage unless each activation of indirect does a lot of damage. Um, but the consistency is important. That's why I define it as how consistent are your resources per activation at removing opposing resources from play. Um, because when you activate, um, you want to trust that you're going to be able to do what you want that unit to do. You are spending a resource a lot of times by exposing it to opposing reactions. So if you are exposing that resource, you want it to kill the thing or remove the resource that you are asking it to remove. There is consistency can take multiple forms. One is consistency in the rolls, re-rolls, or +1 to hit, +1 to wound, um, auto, like lethal hits, sustained hits. All of these are damage modifiers that we're familiar with. But it can also be consistency into different profiles, having the ability to reactively pivot a rule so that it is instead, uh, you know, you pick sustained hits instead of lethal hits because against this army sustained hits is important, or you spend the same resource but you can pivot what type of damage it has to fit multiple different profiles. If your units can consistently do damage into any type of enemy unit, that is a better type of damage and it is more consistent, even if it's not necessarily like rerolls or something like that. Examples of units with high tier damage, I'm thinking Morven Vol leading the Paragon Warsuits, separated from Detachment Rule or Army Rule. That unit is bonkers damage wise. It can rerolling all hits and wounds with a bunch of shots, is lethal both in shooting and in melee. If you think on a per activation basis, it is remarkably damage efficient. A detachment with S tier damage would be, I think of Cao Yan as a good example. There might be a better example, but Cao Yan having sustained hits and ignore mods as their detachment rule, and then 3 separate individual damage strats are, that most detachments get 1 or sometimes none. So having 3 damage strats and a detachment rule all based around damage output, to me it's got to be a good example of a damage based detachment. Army rule wise, Chaos Space Marines is a great example of just you get sustained hits or lethal hits whenever you want. But Codex Space Marines with Oath of Moment. You can have Custodes with their Sustain and Lethal. Those are all fair examples of army rules that are focused around and are good at dealing damage. The These three kind of pillars of competitive play, deliverability, durability, and damage, all, as I said at the beginning, are important for a competitive play and a competitive list. You cannot make a truly competitive list that does not have some amount of all three of these. If you look at the top meta at any given point, the truth of the matter is that it is going to be is going to have all three of these things, even if it doesn't feel like it on the surface level. You can look at Chaos Knights when they were really strong a bit back and think, but that's just durability. But it's not. It's deliverability because they have the super heavy walker or the Titanic, so they can step into the feature and see everything with long ranges. They have damage because they have these giant guns that are good into almost every profile. Every really strong army that comes out will have damage and the deliverability to put it where it needs to go, and then usually, almost always, some level of durability. Now, that's not to say that you can't win ever if you don't have all three. You need at least two, I will say. I think to win a GT or win a tournament, most of the time you need at least two of these things, because in concert they can overcome the weaknesses of the other. To think about what that would look like, damage. If you lack damage, but you are able to quickly deliver yourself to the front of your opponent and stick into them and hold them still, and because you are durable, they can't kill you, and so you are on the points and holding them back, you can still score points and win the game. You could maybe an army that would be an example of that sort of is like Necrons, Star Shatter, although their deliverability isn't crazy high and their damage isn't remarkably low. I would say the damage is the lower part of that, and you are able to get a lot of value out of just standing on the points with high OC instead. If you lacked durability, often with high deliverability and damage, that's what's called either an Alpha Strike or Glass Cannon army, but usually it comes at the cost of I stage and then I hit you all at once with my whole army and I try and kill you, because if you get to activate into me, I die. So I'm going to kill as much as I can and then tag as much as I can and hope that the durability comes from the fact that you are dead and tagged in combat, and that is going to be enough to keep me alive. Sometimes if you see an Eldar player go crazy and rush down the line, that's sometimes what they're depending on, although they have durability in other ways as well. If you lack deliverability, sometimes you can use durability as a way to make the opponent deliver themselves to you. When I play my Invasion Fleet Swarm, that is what I'm doing. I am putting my Swarm in the middle and all my damage pieces that are slow, because Tyranids have struggled getting all three of these, so you generally have to come up with other ways around it. I put the Termagants in the middle and I let them come to me, and then I jump on them in return. You can overcome them, but Invasion Fleet Swarm will never be the top of the meta because it doesn't have all three. And so there are situations where I don't have control over what happens next, and that makes things more difficult. That doesn't mean that certain armies don't, focus more in one area or the other while having all three. I think a good example, if we were to think about some meta armies right now, we could think about Admech Scutari cohort, which just won the World Championships. The that army's deliverability, damage, and durability are all very high. The damage buff from Call getting reroll hits, the chickens all having twin linked, the sustained 2, and the army rule giving pluses to hit, like all of that all makes the army do a lot of damage pretty consistently. Maybe not the highest in the meta, um, but still very high. And when you combine it with the fact that their deliverability is also very high, where they have access to advance and charge, their chickens, their main gun platforms, all advance and shoot. They can get advance and shoot from the army rule. You have the rust stalkers with +2 to advance, +2 to charge. You have the birds that move 12 inches with advance and shoot, and then shoot and scoot up to 12 inches. All of that makes the army very fast. And the durability with Scutari cohort, like I said before, the detachment rule is one of the best for durability in the game. When you combine it with the army rule, which can give you -1 to hit in melee, along with the data sheets, which have a 4-up save and a 5-up invul, and 2 wounds, which is a pretty solid defensive profile world to sit in. It ends up making them a very durable army as well. So very flexible. If you think about something like Eldari, their deliverability is crazy high. They have warp spiders, they have the army rule that's giving them +3 inches to move, they have +d6/+1 out of a transport that then they get to disembark from, and then the durability's, you would think the durability would be low, but for an army to be good in the meta, you can't have a low amount of any 3 of these. So the reality is they have durability based on their ability to hop back in their transports. So they have Fuegan, who comes out, shoots you, gets back in the transport. Maybe you kill the transport, the unit gets out, shoots you again. Maybe you kill the unit, Fuegan stands back up, shoots you again. If you ever under allocate into an Eldari unit, they get to run away, and then they get to survive and hit you again. The Mog and Raw unit coming out of the Falcon, fire and fading as well. All of that is a lot of durability. At the end of the day, I would say that they still are not top of the meta durability, but they have a couple units and a couple interactions that are the most durable in the game in a lot of ways, because it's hardest to stop them getting multiple activations. And their damage, of course, is often ridiculous. Specifically into some profiles, I would say that Eldari damage into the vast majority of the meta is very strong, but is not as well-rounded as some of the other meta stuff is, and so can every now and then run into some more tricky matchups. But, Fuegan with his friends is going to kill most things when it shoots at them. Something like Star Shatter, those last 2 are 2 very top of the meta things right now. Star Shatter maybe is less so. You're going to see it have lower damage numbers. It still has it, but it's lower. It's going to have deliverability, even though the detachment rule gives things advance and shoot. For the most part, the shooting platforms are move 10 big wonky vehicles. So it kind of takes them from being bad at deliverability to being kind of average at it, like okay. And the long range is good, but at the end of this, they focus most of their ability to deal damage on just being able to make sure no one can just push into them. And then they focus the rest of it into durability. So their durability stat is maxed with reactive moving and stuff like that. Reactive moves, I don't know if I mentioned it before, but were one of the biggest examples of durability. Being able to reactive away is going to keep your unit alive and get you another activation. So when you get to reactive after your opponent has moved, it is always strong. If we remember Phantasm, Star Shatter has an example of that, where you get to reactive after you get shot, which is after the opponent's moved, so they can't react to that as easily. And it overall, along with the Necron regeneration and the datasheet durability of Wraiths, means that is crazy strong. The last example I'm going to kind of talk about is Custodes Talons, they, I would say, have very low deliverability. I'm going to give them like a 2 out of 5 or something on that. Their examples of deliverability that they have are their 6-inch moving units can advance and charge with certain characters, so they get to move 9.5 inches and charge, which is still, I would say, in an army based in melee, pretty below average. The uh, only real solid deliverability I guess they have is a long range on their Caladius Gravitanks, but the Gravitanks aren't that fast, so even though they have long range, it kind of is still not very good. So all things considered, low deliverability. Their damage is solid. Custodes, when they hit you, you feel it. But the problem is, Custodes damage is mostly one note. So you have a situation where if you run into -1 damage, it feels terrible. If you run into Armor Contempt in certain instances, it feels terrible. So regardless of, even though the damage by and large is high, even if you were to pivot what we're talking about over to like Lions of the Emperor detachment, damage is still pretty solid, but your deliverability is low. The durability, I would say, is fairly high. You have 4-up Feel No Pain on your Wardens, which you're taking most of the time, 2-up Save on everything. In Talons of the Emperor, you have a reactive move, which is really solid durability. So you generally, because of your low deliverability, you walk up to your opponent and they get a turn to interact with you, and then you hit them as hard as you can and are all piled in and stuck in with them. So the army is not having a good time right now because its deliverability, I think, is so low that it can't play the game that a lot of these other armies are playing, because they have to chew their way through too much with, not efficient enough durability profiles, I guess. Even though they are very durable, it's not enough because they can't choose their engagements. They're dying too fast. So, all that to say, let's kind of put a capper on this. What is the takeaway? And the takeaway is that if you are thinking, hey, my army is bad, or this rule is bad, or this is too strong, you should place it into one of these 3 matrices, these pillars of competitive success, because doing so and understanding how they interact is going to help you understand why certain armies maybe deserve a strong rule in a vacuum, because the rest of the army can't handle it. And it also will help you be wary of and identify what makes a strong detachment or data sheet for any specific army. If I see an army like Emperor's Children that has high deliverability with their advance and activate and high durability with their fall back and activate, the slightly lower, I guess. So super high deliverability, slightly lower durability, and then no damage from their army rule. The thing that I'm thinking of when I'm making an Emperor's Children army is I'm going to pick data sheets and detachments that boost my damage mainly, and I also want to have a little bit of a boost to my durability. My deliverability is pretty much taken care of, so I need to make sure that I hit all 3 metrics, and that's why even though if you saw the advance reroll advances, I'm blanking on the name, but the detachment that lets you reroll advances, it also has a bunch of interesting deliverability tech. In another army it might be cool and it might seem strong in Emperor's Children because you're like, wow, they all advance and activate. If you reroll advances, they're that much faster. But the problem is the army doesn't need to be faster. It needs to deal with its 2 weaknesses first. So the detachments that you're going to see have more success are Coterie, where you get a lot of damage buffs, you have a really solid damage strat and damage buffs from the detachment itself, and then you also get durability buffs in the Force You to Fight Me strat and the Armor of Contempt strat. And then you have Demon Princes, which are durable on their datasheet and do damage on the charge. All of that's going to add together to a really strong army, right? And using that way of making lists and analyzing strength will help you kind of take a breather in places where you think something is too strong, where it's actually maybe strong but fine in the context of the other rules at play, or correctly scream out and yell and cry and pee in instances where a rule is strong within the context of its army, where an army is struggling and has something that they are not excellent at, suddenly a detachment comes out that solves for that, and it's a problem. I also, I guess, want to put a small shout out to like the reason I play Tyranids. I'm a Tyranid player. The reason why Tyranids struggle in general in the course of the edition of being a truly high competitive army is that the army rule that we have does not feed into any one of these three directly in any consistent way. It feeds into damage a little bit, because if someone can't use reactive durability strats, that's pretty good. But that's kind of it. And in reality, it's not helping you play the game in this core way that you need to be able to. I also think about Chaos Knights potentially. Their army rule got renovated, so now they can take, army-wide stealth or things like that that kind of do feed into these, but the majority of the rule, I would say, still struggles at feeding into this, and they were meta prior mostly just based on their data sheets and detachments. Their army rule was not a huge part of what made them insane. And so these armies that have worse army rules, which by and large have a huge budget for strength in the game, most armies' army rule is wildly powerful, taken out of context. If an army does not have that, their budget for detachments and data sheets should be a little bit higher. I don't mind Chaos Knights having a little bit stronger data sheets and detachments, within reason, of course, but they should still be able to meet those three main categories, the three pillars of competitive play. Tyranids, we don't necessarily have that detachment or data sheet, so we don't have that can hit all three. So usually Tyranids are focusing on doing two. If I'm playing Vanguard Nids, I'm doing deliverability and damage. If I'm doing Invasion Fleet Swarm, I'm doing durability and damage. And I'm trying to make up for my weaknesses in the other ways because I don't have an army rule that's reinforcing one off the start. So I will drop Tyranids for now so that my other listeners, I guess, who are not Tyranid players don't leave. But I guess keep that on your mind. I'll talk about it more in later videos, maybe. So yeah, that's the conclusion of the three pillars of competitive play. If you have any questions about any of that, feel free to leave a comment or reach out. I'm happy to answer them. But keep these in mind as you are building lists. And I think in my future videos, I'm going to reference these three a lot. So hopefully they're going to be a nice starting base point for you to step into thinking about the game in a competitive way.